Hey everyone, it's Dr. NightStare. Glad you're here. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Alright, let's get settled. Get comfortable, let your body relax, and just take it easy. The scorching air always tasted of grit, a permanent reminder of the long drought. Every drop of water became a trade, a life saved or lost. NGO militias patrolled the dry streets, their armored vehicles churning up plumes of dust, enforcing water quotas and punishing transgressors. I knew their rules well, but my family's thirst outweighed my fear. Each night I risked everything, making my way to the periphery of the pumping station. I found a weak point in a pipe, a small fissure where I could insert my thin hose and siphon enough water into my worn jerry cans for the day. My daughter's face, pale and thin, always appeared in my mind as I worked, driving away the dread that clawed at my throat. I pictured her future fading with each dry day, and that thought gave me strength to break the rules. During the day, I worked inside that same plant, keeping the old pumps churning for the city's privileged zones. My friend Josak often shared a quick, silent meal with me during our shifts, his presence a small comfort in the suffocating routine. We both understood the quiet desperation that pressed down on everyone. Yesterday, I had discovered a significant leak in a main conduit, a steady stream of water draining into the parched earth below the facility. I could have sealed it easily, but I left it alone, a desperate gamble. The thought of the wasted water, the potential disaster it could cause, churned in my gut. But the image of my daughter's dry lips overshadowed all reason. I needed that water to disappear, to create a desperate opportunity only I would know how to exploit later. The consequences of my choice would come, I knew. The supervisor's face, tight and unforgiving, greeted me as I clocked in. He held a crumpled report in his hand, pointing to the damning entry about the conduit leak. There were no questions, only accusations, and then the stark pronouncement that my service was terminated. The words felt like a physical blow, tearing away my only defense against the dry world. I walked out of the plant for the last time, the sun a mocking glare on my skin, my identity card already deactivated and useless in my pocket. The small amount of siphoned water lasted only a few days. Then our jerry cans stood empty in the corner of our cramped room. Every sip had been measured, every drop hoarded, but the inevitable arrived swiftly. The city's strict quotas meant no ration for those without work permits, and the taps in our block ran dry for us. My few remaining credits, once meant for emergency rations, dwindled to nothing, spent on bare essentials that only prolonged the suffering for a few hours. The dust settled into every crease of our skin and clothes, an unwelcome constant. Soon, the meager water for washing ran out completely, making the simple act of cleaning a forgotten luxury. My daughter's eyes grew dull, her cough deepened, and her skin began to flake away in small patches. The school, once a promise of a better future, became an unreachable place because her clothes were too dirty, her energy too low for the long walk. Despair grew into a bitter resolve, pushing me to trade my last worn possessions for a small, heavy pistol. The transaction happened in a shadowed alley, the dealer's face hidden by a hood, his words hushed and quick. I held the cold metal in my hand, its weight a promise and a terror. Then I hid it deep within my ragged jacket, a secret burden. There was only one direction left to turn, one person who might remember a past loyalty in this pitiless world. Josak, my friend from the plant, represented a fragile thread of hope, and I knew I had to find him. The thought of confronting him, of begging, made my gut clench, but my daughter's face burned behind my eyes, pushing me forward into the gathering darkness. I walked through the parched streets, the gun a hard knot against my ribs, towards the one man I knew who still had access to water. I found Jossack in the alley behind the auxiliary power station, where he sometimes worked late shifts. The air there smelled of spent fuel and stale sweat, a familiar scent from my own working days. He was cleaning a filter panel, his back to me, and he did not hear my approach over the clatter of the cooling vents. I cleared my throat, the sound dry and ragged in the close space. He turned, his shoulders slumping slightly when he recognized me, a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, then resignation crossing his face. "You should not be here," he said, his voice flat, his gaze shifting to the shadowed opening of the alley. He saw the way I looked, the desperation I could not hide. "My daughter needs water, Jossack," I said, the words feeling brittle and raw. "We have nothing left. You work here. You have access." He turned back to his panel, wiping it with a slow, deliberate motion. "I cannot help you much, friend. The quotas are tight for everyone, tighter for those who are fired. They watch everything now." He paused, then sighed a long, weary sound. "I have a small ration, 1 jar. It is all I can spare." He pulled a chipped ceramic jar from a canvas bag hanging on a hook, holding it out towards me. The water sloshed inside, perhaps a liter, hardly enough for a single day for one person. It felt like a cruel joke. "This is all?" I asked, my voice rising, the anger a hot knot in my stomach. "After all these years, after what we shared, my daughter is sick." "It is all I have," he repeated, his eyes hardening, a distance growing between us. "You made your choices, like everyone else." He started to pull the jar back, intending to put it away, to deny me even that meager offering. A red haze bloomed behind my eyes. I lunged forward, my hand seizing his arm, the gun hidden beneath my jacket, a forgotten weight. My fingers closed around his wrist, muscles tense and rigid. He held the jar tight, surprised by my sudden force. We struggled there in the confined space, a desperate, silent dance over the small amount of water. My hand slipped down his arm, reaching for the jar, but he twisted, pulling away with surprising strength. The ceramic felt cold and smooth under my fingertips. His elbow caught me hard in the ribs, a sharp pain, and my breath hitched. I stumbled back against the metal wall, the rough surface scraping my jacket. My hand instinctively went to my chest, where the pistol rested, a comfort and a terror. I pulled it out, not thinking, only reacting to the refusal, the dismissal, the pain of my daughter's thirst. The cold metal was heavy in my palm. Jossack saw the gun then, his eyes wide with sudden fear. He froze, the jar still clutched in his hand, his mouth open slightly. I had not meant to point it directly at him, not consciously, but the movement was swift, fueled by adrenaline and utter despair. My finger found the trigger, a thin, almost imperceptible pressure. The shot cracked through the confined alley, a deafening explosion that echoed off the metal walls, sharp and brutal. Jossack gasped, a short, ragged sound, and his body spasmed. The ceramic jar slipped from his grasp, shattering against the concrete floor, the precious water spreading into a dark, quickly evaporating stain. He looked down at his chest, then at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, then emptiness. His knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground, a growing crimson bloom spreading across the front of his uniform. The gun felt suddenly light and inert in my hand, still smoking slightly. The scent of gunpowder filled the air, acrid and sickening. Jossack lay still, unmoving, his gaze fixed on nothing. The ringing in my ears slowly faded, replaced by the persistent thrum of the auxiliary station's vents. Jossack lay on the concrete, a dark spreading stain blooming on his uniform. My hand still gripped the pistol, the barrel warm from the shot. Disbelief warred with a cold, terrifying clarity. I had killed him. My friend. For water. The ceramic shards of the jar lay scattered, the precious liquid already absorbed by the thirsty ground. My eyes darted around the alley, searching for any movement, any witness. Nothing. The station hummed its indifferent song. I forced myself to move, my legs stiff and unwilling. I knelt beside Josek, my gaze fixed on his unseeing eyes. His canvas bag, which had held the jar, lay next to him. I fumbled with it, my fingers clumsy. Inside, beneath a worn tunic, I found a sealed, insulated bladder heavy with water, perhaps 3 liters. He had kept it hidden, not just the single jar. The knowledge stung, even as relief washed over me. I took the bladder, my stomach churning. I pulled the pistol from my grip, shoved it back into my jacket, and then stood, forcing myself to walk away from Josek, from what I had done, into the deepening twilight. The water brought a temporary reprieve. My wife, Caitlin, clutched the bladder to her chest, her hands trembling as she poured a small amount into a cracked cup for our daughter. Ilara drank it slowly, her eyes wide, a flicker of light returning to them. We all drank, each sip a heavy, guilt-laden draught for me. The immediate thirst was quenched, the fear of complete dehydration pushed back for a few days. But the memory of Josek's blank stare, the acrid smell of gunpowder, seeped into everything. I saw his face in the shadows, felt the gun's recoil in my dreams, waking with a gasp, my heart pounding. Our small supply dwindled. 2 days passed, then 3. Ilara's cough returned, her energy waning again. The water had been a momentary solution, bought with a terrible price, but it was not enough. One morning, Caitlin left, saying she would try to find work. She returned that evening, her face pale, her eyes hollow, but with a handful of credits. She did not explain where they came from, and I did not ask. The next day, she left again, returning later with more credits, her clothes looking cleaner, yet her movements stiff. The unspoken truth settled between us like a shroud. She was scavenging, trading her body for our survival, for Ilara's next breath. A bitter taste filled my mouth. I hated myself for it, for allowing it, for needing it, but I could not deny the warmth of the credits in her palm, the small measure of hope they bought. The few extra credits bought us meager rations, a small bottle of medicinal syrup for Ilara's cough, and a day's worth of water from a street vendor. The fear of her fading away gnawed at me constantly. The water was always running out, the credits always too few. Josek's water had only delayed the inevitable, buying us a brief, morally compromised respite. The fundamental problem of our survival, of how to live in this dry, pitiless world, remained unanswered. Ilara coughed again, a weak, rattling sound from her corner. Her eyes were dull, her cheeks flushed with a low fever. We were still losing her. Ilara's cough grew harsh, a rattling sound that tore at my insides. Her body burned with fever, and the medicinal syrup bought with Caitlin's credits did nothing. Her eyes, once bright even in scarcity, had sunk deep into their sockets, clouded with pain. Caitlin sat beside her, her face drawn, stroking Ilara's forehead with a cloth. We had no more water for drinking, let alone for cooling her skin. The last credits were gone, spent on a worthless hope. A man came to our door, a shadow in the doorway, smelling of stimulants and something sweet. I had seen him on the streets, one of the dealers who preyed on the desperate. He looked at Ilara, his gaze lingering on her frail form. "I hear you have a child who needs help," he said, his voice soft. "There are places that can take care of children like her. Give them what they need." He spoke of clinics, of safe havens, promises I knew were lies. But the desperation in Caitlin's eyes held a spark of consideration. I gripped her arm, but she pulled away, her resolve brittle. The man promised water, medicine, a future. He promised escape. I watched, numb and powerless, as Caitlin bundled Ilara in a thin blanket. Ilara's weak cough was the only sound. Caitlin did not look at me. The dealer gave her a pouch of credits, a final transaction. He took Elara from Caitlin's arms, a small, still bundle. My daughter's eyes were closed. The man nodded once, then turned and vanished into the parched street, carrying my future, carrying all I had left. Caitlin crumpled to the floor, a guttural sound torn from her throat. Something inside me broke then. The violence against Jossack, the unspoken shame of Caitlin scavenging, Elara's fading light, now her disappearance. It all coalesced into a heavy weight. There was no more fight. There was no more reason to fight. I walked out, leaving Caitlin weeping on the floor. The city stretched before me, a vast, indifferent city. I walked past the market stalls, past the NGO patrols, their presence now irrelevant. I walked until I reached the edge of the city where the Dries gathered. They lay in the dust, their skin cracked, their eyes glazed, waiting for the end. They did not speak, did not move, only existed in their slow decline. I lay down among them, the hot ground hard beneath my back. The sun beat down, a heat that had consumed everything. My mouth was dry, my throat raw. My vision blurred, and the world seemed to shrink to the small patch of cracked earth before my eyes. This was it. The surrender. No more struggle, no more choices, no more pain. I closed my eyes, inviting the emptiness. The heat pressed in, a final close. Then a cold drop landed on my face, shocking me. I flinched, my eyes snapping open. Another drop. Then another, cold and definite, hitting my skin. I looked up. The sky, which had been a relentless, cloudless expanse for as long as I could remember, was now a deep gray. A drizzle began, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. The air cooled, thick with the scent of wet dust. Rain. Real rain. It was falling cold and clean on my face, on the parched ground, on the dying trees around me. The drops turned into a steady downpour, drumming on the cracked earth, washing away the grit. The water flowed over my skin, trickling into my mouth, washing the taste of despair away. It was a miracle, a harsh mockery, a challenge thrown at my surrender. The rain was everywhere. It filled the air with its sound, blurring the edges of the dying city. It brought the very thing I had killed for, schemed for, lost everything for, now freely. My body, which had been ready to give up, felt a faint twitch. Was this another chance? Was this a new beginning? Or simply a final, agonizing torment before the true end? I lay there, drenched, the cold rain blurring my vision, the choice to live or truly die a new burden. A persistent tugging at my shirt sleeve dragged me from the deep sleep I had only just found, pulling me unwillingly back into the conscious world. My eyes opened slowly in the dark bedroom, struggling to focus on the shadowy figure standing beside my bed. It was Leo, my 6-year-old son, his face a pale blur in the dimness of the room. "Mommy," he whispered insistently, his voice just loud enough to pierce through my exhaustion. "I need water." A tired groan started in my throat before I could stop it, because I had specifically filled his cup with water and placed it on his bedside table before I tucked him in just an hour before. This felt like another one of his familiar pleas for a few more minutes out of bed, but tonight it struck me as a deliberate disruption of the rest I desperately needed. "Mommy, please," he repeated, his voice now a reedy, desperate sound that carried an unusual weight. "It feels different this time. I can't sleep without it." My patience, already thin, frayed completely. I let out a long, exasperated sigh. His urgency was unsettling, a strange shift from his usual antics. I pushed back the covers, the cool air touching my skin, and swung my legs off the bed. My feet touched the cold floor. "Fine," I muttered, my voice thick with sleep and irritation. "But just this once." I stood up slowly, my body protesting every movement, and turned towards the bedroom door. Leo falling into step beside me. I took a slow breath as we stepped into the kitchen, the room feeling cool and large around us. The single nightlight plugged into the wall cast a weak orange glow, barely pushing back the deep shadows clinging to the counters and cabinets. I moved automatically towards the refrigerator, my hand reaching for the cold metal handle. As my fingers closed around the handle, Leo pressed something into my palm. I looked down at his small toy phone. He usually pretended to talk into it during playtime. I started to question him, my tired brain struggling to understand this new interruption. But then his tiny hand closed around mine, tightening his grip on the plastic device. He leaned in close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "Call the police," he whispered, his voice thin but clear, devoid of any childish waver. "I saw Daddy outside trying to break into your room." The old floorboard groaned under my weight as I pried it up, exposing the dark space beneath, and then my fingers brushed against something solid. I pulled out a heavy canvas bag, its rough fabric worn smooth from time, and a gasp caught in my throat when I emptied its contents onto the worn rug. Stacks of crisp $100 bills gleamed under the dim light, an unbelievable sum beyond any dream I had ever dared to entertain. My breath hitched and a thrill shot through my veins, pushing away the dull ache of my everyday existence. My mother and brother, with their constant worries and their endless requests for help, vanished from my mind as if they had never existed. This money was mine, every single bill, and the world immediately opened up to gleaming sports cars, luxurious penthouses, and exotic vacations, all waiting just for me. I moved into a penthouse suite overlooking the city, its vast windows showing everything below. My closet filled with designer clothes, silk and cashmere replacing the cotton I had always worn. Costly watches adorned my wrist, each one showing my wealth. I ate in expensive restaurants, dismissing waiters with a quick gesture, and traveled to places far away, never staying long enough to grow bored. One afternoon, walking through a shopping district, a man in worn clothes sat huddled in a doorway. His eyes looked humble, his hand was out, but I felt only scorn. I pulled out a crisp $100 bill, crumpled it into a tight ball, and dropped it into a nearby overflowing trash can right in front of him. A cruel smile stretched my lips as I walked away, his defeated face staying clear in my memory, and a feeling of intense power thrilled me. The thrill of my power lingered even as I settled into my penthouse, the city lights a glittering backdrop to my perfect world. A satisfied sigh left my lips, a deep contentment warming me from within. Then a strange tickle began in my throat, a dry sensation that quickly intensified. I coughed, a sudden, violent expulsion that ripped through my chest. My hand flew to my mouth, and when I pulled it away, scarlet smeared my palm. My stomach lurched. As I stared, a dull clink echoed, and 2 gold coins dropped onto the plush carpet from my hand, glinting wetly. A cold dread seeped into my bones, replacing all satisfaction. The cold dread spread, turning my skin strangely rigid. My fingers stiffened, then cracked, and more blood burst from my mouth, now mixed with dozens of gold and silver coins. My vision blurred, but I clearly saw my hands changing. The flesh peeled away, replaced by tightly rolled bills and by stacks of clinking coins. My arms dried, a sickening crunching sound, and then they fell apart, hitting the carpet as a cascade of money. My legs followed, the bones crumbling into coins, the muscle tearing into crisp paper. A piercing agony shot through me as my torso buckled, my chest cavity collapsing into a shifting pile of currency. My head was the last part to go, my eyes still seeing as my face crumbled into banknotes, my skull dissolving into a heap of silver and gold. I was just money, a scattered, worthless pile on the expensive floor. Then a deep, resonant voice echoed through the penthouse, everywhere and nowhere at once. "Your immense greed consumed you completely," the voice stated, each word a cold judgment. "You hoarded this wealth, discarding all compassion, forgetting the true value of life you once possessed. Now you are the very currency you desired, destined to be scattered, a mere transaction for others to claim. Others will find their own fortune, and some will repeat your foolish path, for this inescapable cycle demands its bitter toll." My headset felt snug, the familiar pressure a comfort against the usual tide of forgotten passwords and buffering videos. Another call connected, a quiet click in my ear, and a voice spoke, a bit hesitant, through the digital line. "Hi, I'm calling about my music app," the user began. "Something strange is happening with my playlists." I typed notes, a standard procedure ready for the usual complaints. "Could you describe the issue for me?" "Songs just appear," the user explained. "They aren't ones I've added or searched for. They're completely random, often bizarre, and then they vanish." My first thought drifted to algorithmic suggestions gone rogue, perhaps a friend sharing a playlist or an accidental tap in the app. "Sometimes the app suggests songs based on your listening habits," I offered, keeping my tone helpful and calm. "Or maybe someone else accessed your account." "No, it's not that," the user insisted, their voice gaining a firmer edge. "I checked everything. These songs are totally out of left field, and they appear and disappear on their own." Then came the first real tremor in their composure, a slight hitch that caught my attention. "Last week I had a song show up," they continued. "It was titled The Last Bus Home. I didn't think anything of it at first, just another weird addition. But that morning, my actual bus to work just didn't come. It broke down 2 stops before mine, according to the news later. And when I finally got home, the song was gone, completely. A cold tendril of something, not quite fear, but definitely unease, brushed against my professional composure." "That sounds like a striking coincidence," I said, my voice carefully modulated. "Sometimes things just happen at the same time." I tried to ground the situation, to pull it back into the realm of technical glitches and everyday occurrences, dismissing the user's unsettling story as a trick of timing. "It wasn't a coincidence," the user stated with quiet certainty. "It happened repeatedly since then. Each song predicts an event, then disappears after it happens." My hands hovered over the keyboard. This was not routine. "Give me an example," I requested, a knot forming in my stomach. "The incidents grew personal," the user continued, their voice hushed. "Last week, whispers in the hall played for a day. I heard sounds around my apartment, like movement just out of sight, until it deleted itself. They sounded terrified. I tried everything," the user said. Desperation colored their tone. "Deleting the playlist, uninstalling the app, even resetting my phone did nothing. The playlist always returned, new songs waiting. They sounded helpless." "And today?" I asked, my voice a whisper, dread pooling in my chest. "This morning," the user replied, their voice barely audible. "A new song appeared. Just my full name as the title, 30 seconds long. It plays shuffling sounds, like shoes on the hard surface, and then nothing. A complete absence of sound." My breath caught in my throat, a cold dread displacing the practiced calm as my mind raced, piecing together the events of The Last Bus Home, whispers in the hall, and now this personal, terrifying omen. The professionalism I had clung to evaporated. My voice now shook when I stammered, "Listen to me. Stay calm. Tell me your address because I'm going to call the police for you right now." A sound emerged from the user's end, low at first, a heavy thump, then another, rhythmic and unnatural. It was a distinct, deliberate cadence, like someone walking slowly, intentionally across a hard floor. Each step grew louder, closer, the pauses between them shrinking. I heard the user inhale, then gasped suddenly. "Someone is," they began, their voice a strained whisper, but the sentence ended there. The line went dead with an immediate, sharp click, severing our connection without warning. I pulled the headset from my ear, holding the receiver, listening to the silence that now filled my office, a silence that filled me with terror. I woke up. My body felt stiff and cold. The motel room offered no warmth. The memory of the night before weighed on me. I still tasted lake water, and the smell of wet earth clung to the sheets. My boots lay by the door, caked with lake mud. My jeans were stiff with dampness around the ankles. This was not a dream. I reached for my phone, my fingers shook as I scrolled through recent calls. No signal appeared. The no service notification remained. I moved to the window, then to the bed, but nothing changed. My journal lay on the small bedside table, its cover damp and warped. I picked it up, feeling the cold, clammy paper beneath my thumb. A shiver ran down my spine. The world outside this room felt wrong. I felt stranded and exposed. Something was wrong. I knew it was still out there, waiting. I could not escape. I grabbed my keys, hand shaking, driven by a desperate hope of escape. I climbed into my truck. The lake's pervasive, cold and damp, earthy smell filled the interior, making escape impossible before I turned the key. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Abandoning my uncle weighed heavily. His weathered, kind face flashed, knowing he was still out there, near that horrifying water. A heavy, suffocating guilt washed over me. I could not drive away and leave him to that unknown menace. My gaze drifted to the damp journal on the passenger seat. I picked it up, tracing the warped cover. I found my uncle's erratic handwriting, notes on local geology, with coordinates circled. Beneath them, in a different, urgent script he had written, "It rises here first." The words chilled me. He understood something. Self-preservation screamed at me to flee. But guilt, the cryptic message, and my uncle held me captive. I had to go back. My hand released the steering wheel. I drove back to the cabin, the truck tires crunching on the gravel drive as I approached the dark structure. The porch light was off, and the front door hung open, swaying slightly in the breeze. A cold draft snaked out, carrying that same damp, metallic scent of the lake. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, stepping onto the familiar wooden floor, my boots squishing on something wet. Inside the cabin, the air felt still and heavy. The kitchen chairs lay scattered across the linoleum, some broken, and deep gouges scarred the wooden floorboards extending from the doorway towards the back room. The damp, fishy stench, sharp and metallic, permeated the air, catching in my throat with each breath. A glistening track like thick, dark oil marred the floor, leading me past the disarray and deeper into the cabin's shadowed interior. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing overturned furniture and a strange, slimy residue coating everything. It was not just the smell now, I could see the evidence of its passing. The trail led to my uncle's study, a small room filled with books and research papers. The desk was overturned, and his scattered notes lay everywhere. Beneath the desk, wedged against the wall, I saw a waterproof satchel. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Inside, tied with rough twine, was a thick bundle of his intricate, detailed sketches. The paper felt cold and slick. I opened the first sketch, my breath catching in my throat. It depicted a creature of the deep, all scales and fins, a form familiar from old cryptid legends. But the subsequent images charted a horrifying metamorphosis, detailing the gradual emergence of articulated limbs, grasping appendages, and a maw that could unhinge. The teeth shifted and regenerated with disturbing speed. Each sketch seemed more monstrous than the last, showing its form adapting to different environments, evolving from aquatic predator to something that could thrive on land. Its eyes grew larger, more aware, and fixed with a chilling hunger. The final pages detailed its ability to mimic sounds, to lure prey, to become an indistinguishable part of the environment. My uncle's careful notes, scrawled on the margins, spoke of accelerated evolution, of a being that learned, that adapted, that preyed not just on flesh but on memory. I knew then he had not just observed it, he had understood it, and that understanding had cost him everything. Leaving the cabin, my uncle's sickening sketches burned into my mind. I followed the coordinates marked in his journal, pushing through the thick undergrowth along the shore until I reached the secluded inlet. The air here felt heavy, cold, and a strange stillness settled over the water, reflecting the overcast sky without a ripple. I stood on the muddy bank, scanning the dark water, my heart pounding against my ribs. Then a voice drifted across the water, calm and clear. "Are you coming, son?" His voice, though familiar, carried a chilling lack of urgency, a flat quality that sent a freezing shock through my body. It was a lure. A warning screamed through my fear. My eyes darted across the water, searching for any sign, any movement beneath the dark surface. Near the edge of the inlet, half submerged in the murky water, I saw a familiar flickering light. It pulsed weakly, the beam struggling against the murk. It was my uncle's waterproof flashlight. He always carried it. He never would have dropped it there. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was a trap. The creature was aware. It knew I would come. My hands shook, my fingers numb, and the damp journal slipped from my grip, landing on the muddy bank. It fell open. On a fresh, untouched page, new ink bled onto the paper, the words forming slowly, vividly. "It remembers you." My breath hitched. This was not just about my uncle anymore. It knew me. It had always known. The monthly delivery always arrived on the last Tuesday afternoon. I would be sitting at the kitchen table, maybe doing homework, and then a soft thud against the front door would announce the new stack of books. Our front door had a small mail slot, but these packages never came through it. They just appeared there, resting against the weathered wood, tied with a simple twine. Everyone in Clearview received them, a fact we all simply accepted without question. Nobody ever talked about how they arrived, or who delivered them. It was just a part of living here, as normal as the town's name or the single streetlight on Main Street. The Clearview Public Library stood at the end of Elm Avenue, a brick building with tall, arched windows that always seemed to reflect the sky. I passed it nearly every day on my way to school, and I never saw anyone go inside. The doors remained shut, dark wood, uninviting. The building was an established landmark, a part of the town's unchanging scenery. In front, parked precisely in the same spot beside the curb, sat an old moss-green sedan. The car belonged to Mrs. Gable, our town's librarian. She was a quiet woman with hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she sat behind her desk inside the library, visible through the large window, always reading a book. Her car never moved. It had not moved for as long as I could remember, and she was always there. A still figure in a still car, in a still town. My life felt similarly unmoving. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, each one mirroring the last. I would receive my books, read them, and then wait for the next month's delivery. This quiet routine suited me just fine. The world outside Clearview felt distant. a place of loud changes and unexpected events. Here, everything stayed the same, settled into its peculiar rhythm. The library, with its unseen deliveries and its unvisited interior, was the steady heart of this strange, accepted calm, and I was simply a quiet part of it all. The last Tuesday of that summer arrived, clear and hot, but no soft thud came against the front door. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the clock hand move, waiting for the familiar package, but it never appeared. That first missed delivery felt like a minor disturbance, a momentary delay in the town's steady rhythm. But then the next Tuesday came, and still nothing. The monthly mailers, those simple postcards announcing new arrivals that never went through the mail, stopped arriving too. Our mailbox stayed empty of them, month after month. The absence grew from a missed expectation into a nagging worry, a quiet question echoing through Clearview. Nobody spoke about it openly, but I saw the looks on my neighbors' faces, the quick glances towards their empty doorsteps. The magical convenience, once so ordinary, had simply vanished, leaving a strange void. The library itself began to change, too, or rather, the elements surrounding it did. One morning, on my way to school, I noticed something deeply unsettling. Mrs. Gable's moss-green sedan was gone. The precise spot beside the curb where it had sat for as long as I could remember was now empty, just a patch of cracked asphalt. I stared at the blank window of the library, but Mrs. Gable was not visible behind her desk either. The quiet figure, a fixed part of the Clearview landscape, had simply disappeared, leaving the building looking even more deserted, more like a forgotten tomb. The library doors remained shut, dark and silent, but now they seemed to guard a new, deeper secret. It was around that time I met Beth. She had moved to Clearview with her family that spring, bringing a current of energy and bright curiosity to our settled town. Beth had hair the color of sunset, always pulled back in a loose braid that bounced when she talked. She smiled often, a wide, genuine smile that crinkled her eyes. She did not accept things the way everyone else did. She asked questions, constant questions, about the quiet deliveries, about Mrs. Gable, about the never-visited library. She found the town's peculiarities fascinating, not just normal. She stirred things, always tugging at the edges of my quiet, unmoving life. One afternoon, we walked past the library, its dark windows reflecting the afternoon sky. "It is just sitting there," Beth said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "Always shut, always empty. What do you think is inside, Elliot?" I shrugged, a familiar instinct to dismiss the topic. "Nobody goes in there, Beth. It is just how things are." She turned to me, her eyes sparkling with challenge. "But why? Don't you ever wonder? What if the books are not coming out because something happens in there?" She paused, her gaze fixed on the forbidding doors. "I bet nobody in this town has ever stepped inside. What do you say, Elliot? Think you are brave enough to break the rule?" Her words hung in the air, a dare that promised to shatter not just a strange town custom, but my own carefully constructed peace. Beth's smile was a warm invitation, pulling me forward. My breath hitched as she took my hand, her fingers warm around mine, and she tugged gently towards the dark wooden doors. The sun cast long shadows across the empty street. The library, a fixture in my life, had always been an outside thing, a building I observed but never interacted with. Stepping towards it felt like breaking some unspoken ancient vow. Beth pushed one of the heavy doors open with a surprising ease. An old groan of wood greeted us. I expected stale air, a chill, perhaps an immediate sense of wrongness, but the air inside was still and dry. Sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows, illuminating polished wooden shelves that reached the high ceiling. Rows upon rows of books stood in perfect order, their spines a kaleidoscope of muted colors. It looked like any other library, just deserted. There was no desk, No sign of Mrs. Gable, only the silent stacks. Beth led me deeper into the aisles, her hand still holding mine. She moved with a curious grace, weaving between the towering shelves. The quiet here was different from the quiet outside. It was a deep silence that seemed to absorb all sound. We stopped in a narrow aisle, surrounded by volumes on history, their titles embossed in fading gold. Beth turned to me, her eyes soft in the dappled light. She leaned in close, her breath warm against my cheek. I felt a flutter in my chest, a feeling as new and thrilling as this forbidden entry. Her lips met mine, a soft, tentative touch that deepened into a genuine kiss. It was my first kiss, clumsy and sweet. Then something changed. Her lips grew cold. A strange, rasping sound escaped her throat. I pulled back slightly, confused. Her skin, which had been warm moments before, now felt slick and thin. Her eyes widened, not with passion, but with a sudden, disturbing hollowness, and the pupils seemed to dilate, stretching blackly across the entire iris. Her hair, that vibrant sunset color, began to fray at the ends, the strands thinning and breaking apart. Her face elongated, the bones shifting and stretching beneath the tightening skin. Her jaw unhinged, dropping impossibly wide, revealing not teeth but a swirling, inky blackness. A sickening groan tore from her transformed mouth, a sound of agony and something else, something ancient and hungry. Her body contorted, bending backwards at an unnatural angle, her limbs twisting, snapping with wet cracks that echoed in the deep quiet. She was not Beth anymore. She was a grotesque parody, her form dissolving, her skin peeling away in thin, papery strips to reveal something writhing beneath, something dark and sinewy that tore itself apart. My blood ran cold. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet. My mind refused to process the horror unfolding before me. The air grew thick, pressing in on me, stealing my breath. A tendril, slick and black, shot out from Beth's dissolving form, wrapping itself around my ankle. It was surprisingly strong, pulling me down to the polished wooden floor. Another tendril snaked around my wrist, pinning my arm. I struggled, yelling, but no sound came from my constricted throat. My vision blurred, a dizzying spiral of terror. From the dissolving remains of Beth, a book began to rise. It was not a book from the shelves. This book was enormous, taller than me, its cover dark and leathery, throbbing with a soft, steady pulse. Its pages were not bound in the traditional way. They seemed to be a continuous, swirling mass of dark paper. A large, unblinking eye opened on its cover, an amber eye that stared directly at me. I felt a tugging sensation in my head, a strange lightness, as if something was being siphoned from me. Images flashed through my mind, my quiet mornings, the unmoving car, my parents' faces, the smell of my kitchen, Beth's laugh. They were not just memories, they were being pulled out, distinct, vivid particles flowing from my mind into the pulsating book, visible as faint, glowing particles that spiraled into its swirling pages. The book inhaled them, consuming them, growing subtly larger with each swallowed moment. Panic clawed at me. I thrashed against the tendrils binding me, adrenaline surging through my veins. The floorboards creaked under my desperate movements. I tried to scream again, a raw primal sound tearing at my throat, but still nothing came out. The large eye on the book's cover seemed to deepen, its amber color intensifying, pulling more memories. I saw my entire life not as a review, but as distinct pieces being stolen. My identity, my past, my essence was draining away, absorbed by this monstrous entity. Then, a flicker. From the swirling darkness that had been Beth, a faint shimmer appeared, a brief, desperate glow. For just a moment, her true face seemed to coalesce within the horror. Her eyes, filled with an unbearable anguish, stared directly into mine. It was Beth. The girl who smiled. The girl who did. Her lips, though still distorted, formed a single choked word, a raw whisper that echoed in my mind, not in the air. Run. The word pierced through the fog of terror, a desperate plea from the trapped girl. The tendrils holding me tightened painfully for a final moment. Then, with a wet snap, they released me, recoiling into the pulsating book. The book pulsed faster, its eye narrowing as if angered by the momentary rebellion. I did not hesitate. My body, freed from its bonds, screamed with pain, but my mind was clear on one thing. I had to escape. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain, and turned to run. My heart hammered against my ribs. The terrifying image of Beth's warning burned into my mind. I ran blindly through the aisles, the library's oppressive presence heavy on my heels, towards the distant promise of the open doors. I burst through the library doors, gasping for air, collapsing onto the rough pavement outside. My lungs burned, my legs throbbed, and every nerve in my body screamed with pain. The world spun for a moment, the streetlights blurring into streaks. I pulled myself up, stumbling forward. Then I ran. I ran down Elm Avenue, past the empty space where Mrs. Gable's car used to sit, past the houses of my neighbors, their windows dark. The moon was high, casting long, sharp shadows. I had only been inside for what felt like minutes, perhaps an hour at most, but the night air felt different, colder, as if winter had somehow arrived. My house stood at the end of the street, a welcome beacon in the dark. I pushed open the front door, the familiar creak a comfort. My parents were sitting in the living room, their faces etched with lines I did not remember. They looked up, and their eyes widened with shock, then with an overwhelming wave of relief. My mother cried out, rushing towards me, pulling me into a tight embrace. My father gripped my shoulders, his voice thick with emotion. "Elliot, where have you been?" he asked, his voice strained. "We have been so worried. It has been months, son. Months since you disappeared." My mind reeled. Months. It could not be. I told them everything, words tumbling out in a torrent. I spoke of Beth, her smile, the dare, the library, the transformation, the monstrous book, the memories being stolen, and her desperate whisper to run. They listened, their faces growing pale, their eyes wide with disbelief and a deep, worried concern. They did not understand everything, but they saw the terror in my eyes, the raw fear that still clung to me, and they believed my pain. The town had changed too, they said. The library doors had stayed open for a time, just a crack, letting out a strange, almost imperceptible mist that settled over the street before closing again, tighter than before. Weeks passed after that night. I stayed home, trying to piece together the fractured memories, the missing pieces of my own past that the library had stolen. I saw Clearview differently now, its quiet normalcy replaced by a constant, unsettling hum beneath the surface. My parents watched me, worried, their love a steady anchor in my new, disoriented world. The town remained a place of secrets, but now I knew some of them, and that knowledge felt like a brand. Then, one Tuesday, a package arrived on our doorstep. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, tied with simple twine. My blood ran cold. This was not a regular delivery. The library services were gone. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside rested a single book, its cover a dark, smooth leather. It felt cool and strangely alive in my hands. I opened it to the first page. There, just inside the cover, drawn in a delicate, looping script, was a small, perfectly rendered heart. Inside the heart, a single initial, B. Beth's heart. Beth's signature. She had always drawn them in her books, a small mark of ownership, a part of herself. The memory hit me with a jolt, a sharp, aching pang of loss and dread. She was not gone, not truly. She was in there, a part of the library, trapped, signing its new acquisitions with a piece of her tormented self. I closed the book slowly, the leathery cover cold against my fingers. The library had let me go, but it had sent a message, a dark whisper across the quiet town. Beth was still there, and now, so was a piece of her, here in my hands. A chilling reminder that some escapes carry an unbearable cost, a price that would haunt my remaining days in Clearview. My parents had recently divorced, and I was 9 years old. Nighttime felt big and empty, filling me with a deep fear of the dark, and doctors called this night terrors. I always slept on the living room couch when I stayed at my dad's house, finding comfort there. Almost every Wednesday night, after my dad went to bed, I woke up with an urgent feeling. An overwhelming sensation came over me, and I knew someone watched me. Against the dividing wall, just at the edge of my vision, stood a figure. It was tall and black, shaped like a cutout, and it wore a fedora. It stood absolutely motionless. Fear froze me completely, locking my muscles so I could not move. My eyes shifted toward the large, stained glass artwork above the couch. Its many colors and intricate design became my sole focus. I stared at the glass until morning light appeared through the windows. This terrifying ritual happened almost every week for what felt like an entire year. Months passed with the terror, but a weariness settled into my bones that went deeper than anything I had known, and a burning anger followed it. I watched the dark shape against the wall, tired of the fear, tired of the frozen nights, and I told myself it could only be a shadow. A single thought solidified in my mind. Pushing aside the fear, I would confront it. I pushed myself up from the couch, my legs feeling heavy, and I took a single step toward the figure. The entity did not vanish suddenly. Instead, its solid black shape softened at the edges, spreading out into the air, thinning until no trace of it remained against the wall. A scream tore from my throat, a sharp sound in the silent house. I frantically flicked on every light switch I could reach. Then I shouted for my dad, my voice raw. From that night forward, the dark figure never appeared again. The stained glass artwork that had hung above the couch also disappeared. I did not notice its absence for many years, leaving the childhood horror suppressed and unexplained. When I was 24, 15 years after the last incident, I spent a Saturday helping my dad clear out his attic. Deep within a forgotten corner, under thick sheets and old furniture, I uncovered a long cardboard box. Pulling back the lid, my breath caught as I saw the intricate colors of the stained glass artwork. The sight of that glass instantly triggered a rush of suppressed memories. Visceral fear washed over me, shattering my rationalizations that the experience was merely a childhood imagination. The terror, the paralysis, and the shadowy figure all returned with shocking clarity, confirming the reality I had convinced myself was fantasy. A few weeks after that discovery, my mother called me. We talked about different things, and she mentioned the stained glass piece. She casually remarked that I used to talk to the deceased artist of the stained glass when I was only 4 years old. I would spend hours, she said, having conversations through the artwork itself. Her words hung in the air, adding another layer of unsettling context to the already reawakened horror. The most chilling validation, however, came from an online search. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I typed keywords related to dark figures and fedoras into a search engine. What appeared on my screen was a global phenomenon known as the Hat Man. Countless accounts from strangers across the world described identical sightings of a tall, dark, fedora-clad silhouette, just like the one that stood against my dad's wall. My solitary nightmare was not an isolated delusion. It was a shared, inexplicable and terrifyingly real horror. The understanding that others had seen it too did not bring comfort, but a colder, deeper dread, confirming the existence of something dark beyond explanation. I landed the job, a manager role on the graveyard shift, and the salary alone felt like a personal lottery win. Mr. Finch, my new boss, outlined my responsibilities during orientation. He spoke of maintaining the property and ensuring a stable environment. Then he presented the rule book, a thin pamphlet with bizarre mandates. It warned against engaging with unauthorized entities and stressed securing the building against all incursions. A rule about the night staff being dedicated made me raise an eyebrow. It stated some employees might appear disoriented, but I should still provide firm direction. There were also notes about the building itself, advising me to ignore creaking sounds and shifting objects because it was just an old structure. I dismissed it all, every strange sentence, as a result of some corporate security protocol. Perhaps it was a test of my composure or even just an inside joke to scare the new guy. The money, a figure that solved all my looming debts and promised a fresh start, made any oddity seem trivial. I signed the contract without a second thought, eager for the first night. I arrived for my first night shift with a surge of energy. The security office, a small room filled with monitors, felt like a command center. I watched the clock on the main screen, waiting for 8 o'clock when my shift officially began. The building felt different at night, quieter and more imposing. I checked the camera feeds, confirming all external views were clear. The exact moment the clock displayed 8:30 p.m., every external camera feed flickered once then died. The screens displaying the outside world went black instantly, plunging my view of the parking lot and surrounding grounds into sudden darkness. I tried to refresh them, clicking the mouse, but nothing responded. The internal cameras remained active, showing the empty corridors of the building, yet the sudden loss of the outside world felt wrong. A deep tremor shook the entire room, rattling the monitors. I gripped the desk, my knuckles tight as the sound of splintering wood echoed from below. It was not a creak or a groan, but a sharp, violent explosion of material. A section of the floor directly in front of my desk bulged upward, wood cracking and snapping loudly. Then the floorboards burst open entirely. Jagged splinters flew across the room, some hitting the far wall as dark holes appeared in the floor. From these gaping apertures, thin, pale arms began to push through. They were shriveled and dry, with long, yellowed fingernails at their ends. More arms followed, reaching and grasping, twisting into the air with slow, disturbing movement. They came from directly beneath me, clawing their way into the security room from some dark space below. My breath caught in my chest, a heavy sensation settling in my stomach. This was no office joke or corporate test. The strange rules in Mr. Finch's pamphlet, the warnings about disoriented staff and shifting objects, were not hyperbole. They were instructions. The reality of my employment, of this job and its requirements, struck me with undeniable force. I stared at the skeletal limbs writhing from the floor, and I understood then that everything Mr. Finch had told me was literally true. Panic seized me, a cold, sharp claw tightening around my chest. My mind screamed at me to run, to escape this nightmare. I scrambled from the desk, stumbling over my own feet and clawed at the security room door handle. It would not budge. I rattled it violently, pulling and pushing with all my strength. But the heavy metal remained locked, sealed shut. I spun around, my gaze darting to the windows that usually offered a view of the outside world. Now they were just black voids, reflecting nothing, showing no streetlights, no parking lot, no sky. The world outside the building had simply ceased to exist, replaced by an impenetrable darkness. I was trapped inside this horrifying place with whatever was now rising from the floor. More desiccated arms pushed through the splintered wood, grasping at the air, twisting slowly as if searching for something. A foul, earthy odor began to fill the room, a smell of decay and forgotten things. From the internal monitors, I saw movement in the corridors. Figures shuffled into view, their gaunt forms clad in what looked like tattered uniforms. They moved with a lurching, uneven gait, their heads lolling, their limbs stiff. These were the disoriented staff Mr. Finch had mentioned, the employees requiring firm direction. They were zombies, and they were approaching my door, their slow, relentless advance displayed on every screen. My breath hitched, and a desperate, half-formed thought flashed through my terror. The pamphlet's words echoed in my mind. Firm direction. With no other option, no escape, I stared at a lurching figure nearing my door on the main monitor. My voice cracked when I spoke, raw and shaky. "Stop," I commanded, the single word echoing strangely in the small room. The figure on the screen froze mid-step, its head snapping up with a sudden, unnatural jerk. It stood utterly still, staring directly at the camera with hollow, empty eye sockets. A cold dread mixed with a flicker of something else. A terrifying realization coursed through me. "Return to your posts," I ordered, my voice gaining a desperate, brittle strength this time. The figure turned slowly, its tattered clothes rustling, and began to shuffle away down the corridor, back the way it had come. As the last syllable of my command left my lips, a searing heat erupted in my right palm. I gasped, dropping my hand to stare at it. A dark symbol, intricate and burning, was pressing itself into the skin of my hand, branding me. It glowed with a dull, malevolent light, the pain sharp and undeniable. The mark solidified on my skin, a permanent throbbing proof of my new, unwanted authority over the dead. I had given an order, and they had obeyed, and this was the price of that command. The burning mark pulsed, a constant, insistent throb in my hand. My gaze fixed on the security door. One figure stood outside it on the monitor, closer than the others, its tattered uniform more complete, its posture somehow less broken. It was waiting, I realized. The mark on my palm pulsed again, a hot command urging me forward. My hand trembled as I reached for the door release. There was no conscious decision, just an inevitable movement, a slave to the searing brand. The heavy bolt slid back with a loud thud, and the door swung inward. The lead zombie stood directly in front of me, its head tilted, a silent demand in its empty eye sockets. Its hand, desiccated and bone-thin, slowly extended towards me. I felt an irresistible pull, a chilling compulsion from the mark on my palm, forcing my own hand to rise and meet its grip. Our fingers intertwined, cold and dead flesh against my worn skin, a sickening contact that felt too permanent. As my vision adjusted, I saw something familiar in the creature's sunken face, a detail I had overlooked in my terror. The tattered remains of a pinstripe suit, the slight, almost imperceptible curve of a nose, the shape of a jaw that seemed familiar. It was Mr. Finch. My former employer, now a shambling corpse, stared back at me, his grip on my hand tightening with an ancient strength. This was the contract, sealed in undeath. This graveyard shift was more than a job. It was my forever, an eternal vigil as manager of the monstrous staff. The true nature of my lucrative opportunity finally revealed, a permanent, inescapable horror.